Look at Bob Corker, a Republican from Tennessee, a senator who tried to forge a coalition last night, a compromise which failed.
I basically pleaded with them to give me something, give me some kind of language where we would know that at some point, date certain, they were, quote, competitive, not parity, competitive with these other companies. So that is where it broke down.
Okay, he talked about it breaking down over the UAW's refusal to give him, the Senate, a date next year where they would equalize pay between the union and the non-union shops on the auto floor. Now let's take a look at here. The head of the UAW saying that's not true, challenging Senator Corker.
But there's no question, and I think at the end of the day, who was the minority in the Senate representing? Regardless of their motivation. They thought perhaps they could have a twofer here maybe. You know, pierce the heart of organized labor while representing the foreign branch.
Let's go to Mark Green to start with. Mark, it looks like we have a battle here between the union leader there, Gettelfinger of the UAW, United Auto Workers, who tried to defend his position, which was they agreed to equalize wage rates between union and non-union workers at some point. The Republican senator from Tennessee said, yeah, but you're not agreeing to do it next year, which is what we want as part of a compromise. Is this about labor rights? Is that what this fight's really about, whether we should have unionized labor or not in the auto industry?
No, the GOP may want to make this into a union-busting, anti-union issue. The issue is up to 10 million jobs in America, if you count suppliers and dealers and creditors and, of course, the workers themselves, are at risk at the very moment that the economy has such an illness. And so the ultimate issue is workers. And if the head of Goldman Sachs, now the Treasury Secretary, the head of an oil company, now the president, get $700 billion because they think it's necessary to stabilize the economy for Wall Street. Here, Detroit wants 2% of $7 billion, and suddenly the conditions are extremely detailed. Of course, all the stakeholders should and will give up something. But to tell a worker, Chris, that you may have to cut your pay by a fourth to a third within 1 year is calamitous. It's not fair, and I think the GOP is now going to have to figure out how to handle the political fallout. Blue-collar Americans around the country are seeing this headline. GOP to Detroit, drop dead.
Well, let's talk. Is that your reading of this, Michael Smerconish, that this is about an attempt to bust unions and bust workers who are getting a good pay and getting them to accept an unreasonable pay cut?
No, I think it's a philosophical battle as to what is the role of government when you have a distressed industry. Where is this going to end? What other industries will be subject to the next bailout? And are we rewarding bad business practices instead of forcing them into some kind of a managed bankruptcy, which would certainly guarantee a restructuring of what has plagued Detroit over the span of the last several decades? What I found distressing about the clips that you ran was Harry Reid and this notion that we could work all night and will be no closer to resolution. Now, maybe he's accurate, but why don't they work all night? You know, Chris, it occurs to me that we have these individuals who run for the U.S. Senate and they raise millions and millions of dollars, and then the minute they get to Washington, all they want to do is go the hell home. I mean, they work down there ridiculous hours.
Well, let me ask you about the real conundrum here. Is this a real conundrum, a real obstacle? Michael, you started here. Is that a reasonable issue upon which to bring down the auto industry? That the Auto Workers Union, which organizes in a lot of the states, wants to hold to its wage rates at least through next year, and the Republicans say, no, if you want to compromise, you want our support for this bailout, you've got to cut your wages next year. That's the deal or no deal. Is that the problem here? Let's try to get to the problem here.
Well, I think that is the problem. I think it's the $73 an hour figure. Oh. I know that gets bandied about, but the large part of it that needs to be addressed are the retiree benefits. And, you know, it's not so much that it's union busting. It's what the unions have done a very effective job for their force. But now Detroit can't handle those payments. So what's to be done with those great wages that have been earned over a long period of time, including the retiree benefit, and who's prepared to give something back?
Chris?
You know, Michael, Mark, I always looked upon the UAW as a good example of a union that got health care for its workers. I always thought the old Walter Reuther deal they struck, which was health care, whoever did it, was good for the country because people who work hard ought to get a health care benefit as part of their work. Who else is going to pay for it? And I thought that, and now we're talking about what, dismembering those packages or what?
Look, Smerconish said $73 an hour pay. I don't know if you saw yesterday's front page New York Times.
I did.
Which documented that 73 is totally false. Look, the problem, you said the issue is philosophical. This reminds me of the old joke. It works in practice, but it may not work in theory. The theory, you're right. Where do we draw a line on when public money helps boost and maintain a private company which is indispensable to the national economy? That's an interesting issue. We lost 2 million jobs this year, the largest job loss of any month in 34 years. We're approaching 7 to 8% unemployment. And so right now, this is the FDR analogy with Lend-Lease. If your neighbor's house is on fire, you lend them your hose to put out the fire. This is a loan. It's not just a gift. The idea is a loan, more expensive, but like the Chrysler loan of 30 years ago, which was repaid, to make sure that we don't turn a bad recession into a near depression.
Mark, I think I would say respectfully, there are a lot of houses on fire right now in a lot of different industries, and there is an alternative in this case, and the alternative is a managed bankruptcy. You know, there are plenty of airlines that have emerged from bankruptcy. Why can't we put the auto industry in a similar parameter? Then we know there'll be restructuring.
You asked a fair question. The airline industry went bankrupt, and the next day American Airlines had the same mechanics, planes, and fuel costs. And so I would go on the plane and not worry. The minute one of the big three goes bankrupt, credit stops, supplies stop, dealers shut down, and who wants to buy a car if you don't know there are parts? Everybody who's looked at it sees that a normal bankruptcy would be calamitous. Now, if you want a structured bankruptcy through legislation, which is in effect what almost happened, well, that's a different story. And when you say a lot of companies are in trouble, name an industry that is as important to the American economy as the auto industry in such trouble that could bring down the whole economy.
Well, the financial industry.
Okay, let me ask you, Michael.
They got
Let me change
$700
one point
billion.
out. Let me take up Mark's argument with you, Michael, for a minute there. Why do a lot of people, conservatives in many cases, free marketers, have a real problem with bailing out the auto industry? They're ready for a packaged bankruptcy plan instead, but yet they were able to vote for the $700 billion financial bailout.
Well, Chris, there's an inconsistency clearly between those who would oppose one and were supportive of the other. And I think that if many of those who supported the 700 had it to do over again, they'd be in opposition, and they felt like they had a gun to their head when they did it. I mean, this is
like
really
21 senators who are like that.
This is really a geographical battle as much as it is an ideological battle. I'm sure you looked at the map as I did today with a political eye, and you can't help but notice that it's the Rust Belt states versus the South in what's going on.
Well, why is that? Explain that, Michael. Why is it that people in Tennessee, Kentucky, Alabama oppose the auto bailout, and people from the colder part of the country, not just the Midwest, but across the North, and maybe it's for support of the UAW, let's be blunt about it, are all for it? Explain, Michael.
Because all politics are local, and you've got any number of foreign cars being made in the South by American labor forces. I mean, here's another of, I think, the very legitimate issues. What does it say to someone who is working for a foreign manufacturer down south that is based obviously offshore, but they're American workers, they're in this country, they're going to work every day? Why should they now be disadvantaged because Detroit is being bailed out when in fact they're competing with those same automobile manufacturers?
Chris,
Mark?
The auto workers have lost real income over time, have given back health benefits, and I'm guessing as a key stakeholder would be willing to give a little more if everybody else did. But we are attacking the victim. I don't know if, Michael, you saw the movie Who Killed the Electric Car?
I did.
12 years ago, we had a plug-in hybrid, and GM killed it because it was threatening their carbon-based cars. The countries we compete with have national health care, so their workers are covered without having to ask consumers to pay for it. In our country, it costs $1,500 a car, which is a competitive disadvantage. So it's to simply blame workers or the unions, as a Mitch McConnell might, based on Republican economic theocracy, is, I think, so misplaced, and it plays Russian roulette with our economy when it's weak.
But you're misreading me. I'm far from blaming workers for the predicament faced by Detroit. I wish we had that electric car, but I don't blame the workers for that. I blame the management that turned their back on that opportunity. I just have no faith in bailing them out that will get to where apparently you and I both agree we need to be.
Okay, I guess the hot potato, gentlemen, has been thrown into the White House because the president's going to have to decide now, according to what you hear from the Democrats on Capitol Hill, we're going to have the president decide whether to take a portion of the guaranteed loan authority he has under the TARP bill with the financial bailout of $700 billion, take a portion of that, a small portion, and apply it to the auto industry itself. We'll see how he develops that decision over the weekend. Michael Smerconish, have a nice weekend. Mark Green as well.